Global trust in the United States is rapidly declining. The US maintained hegemony through strong cooperation and trust with allies and friendly nations, but that's now collapsing. Today, let's take a closer look at this issue. Let's get right into it. First, let's take a look at the Pew Research Survey. Recently, the Pew Research Center reported that in 25 of 36 countries and regions, China had a higher favorability rating than the United States. Countries with a higher favorability toward China included major US allies such as Canada, Mexico, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. On top of that, President Xi Jinping is now receiving more positive evaluations than President Trump. In fact, out of the 36 countries, 22 said they would trust President Xi Jinping more. The Pew Research Center has tracked global public opinion for 20 years, but this is the first time China has surpassed the United States. If we look at the figures in more detail, until 2023, the global favorability rating for the United States was 58%, while China's was only 32%. But when the survey was conducted again in 2026, the United States dropped sharply to 36%, while China rose dramatically to 46%. Notably, the shift in perception among the United States' key allies was dramatic. For instance, Canada's favorability rating for the US fell from 57% in 2023 to just 33%. During the same period, the favorability rating for China rose sharply from 14% to 44%. Analysts say the decline in favorability toward the United States was heavily influenced by President Trump's diplomatic approach and trade policies. After taking office, President Trump again prioritized America first, putting US economic interests above all. In particular, he made trade issues a key priority and implemented large-scale tariff policies targeting several countries. President Trump said the US had faced a massive trade deficit for years and insisted strong measures were needed to fix this unfair trade structure. As a result, not only China, but also major allies in Europe and Asia were included in the scope of tariffs, raising concerns in the international community about the direction of the United States' economic policies. In particular, close allies of the United States expressed dissatisfaction with the fact that the US was exerting economic pressure on them separately from their security cooperation. In the past, the United States was strongly perceived as a country leading free trade and international policies in the global economic order. But after the Trump administration's tariff policies, there have been assessments that the US is shaking up the existing order for its own interests. The Trump administration's tariff policies faced legal challenges, with some measures halted by the Supreme Court during review. President Trump used other legal grounds to push for the introduction of new tariffs. During this process, analysts pointed out that the international community increasingly viewed US policy direction as unpredictable. Above all, President Trump's expansion of military involvement has most impacted the United States' international image. Despite often stating that the US should avoid deep overseas wars and pledging to reduce unnecessary conflicts, his actions have shaped global perceptions. However, after taking office, his actual actions have been seen as moving in a different direction from those statements. After military action in Venezuela in 2026 and clashes with Iran, the international community increasingly sees the United States as actively intervening in foreign conflicts. In particular, the biggest controversy during the war with Iran was the issue of prior consultation with allied countries. The United States was criticized for not having sufficient discussions with its key allies in the Gulf region during the attack on Iran. These countries have long cooperated on security with the United States, but were strongly dissatisfied about not getting enough advance information despite the risk to their own territories and key facilities. European allies voiced similar concerns. Since US military actions directly affected international security, critics noted the lack of consultation with allies and trust in US diplomatic decisions started to erode. In particular, the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that occurred after the clash with Iran had a significant impact on the global economy. Instability in the Strait of Hormuz, a key energy route, became a direct burden for countries reliant on Middle Eastern oil. As US military actions led to economic damage for its allies, concerns about US security policy also grew. In addition, Iran expanded its attacks to Gulf countries close to the United States, and as a result, even countries that were not directly involved in the war found themselves in a state of military tension. The Gulf countries started to doubt if security cooperation with the United States would truly protect them in a real crisis. The Wall Street Journal reported the Trump administration was considering withdrawing US troops stationed in Kuwait. Kuwait has long served as a key US military base in the Middle East, but analysts say the presence of US troops may not only strengthen security, but also increase the risk of attacks from Iran. From Kuwait's perspective, concerns have grown that the country could become a target of military conflict if the United States cannot provide complete defense. Another factor that has been pointed out as undermining trust in the United States is, it was President Trump's frequent changes in stance. President Trump repeatedly made strong statements on major diplomatic issues, only to issue messages in a different direction not long after. This was especially evident in the case of Iran. President Trump would warn of strong measures against Iran and mention the possibility of military action, but the next day he would emphasize the possibility of dialogue by saying that negotiations with Iran were underway. As statements kept changing, the international community said predicting the US response became difficult. In international diplomacy, the message a country's leader sends has a significant impact on the decisions of both allies and adversaries. As President Trump rapidly alternated between tough and conciliatory statements, concerns arose about understanding U.S. policy direction. Countries with security ties to the U.S. became even more sensitive, since America's choices could directly impact their security and economy. President Trump's communication style sparked controversy as he used Truth Social to directly announce major policies and positions on international issues, unlike previous presidents. Supporters saw this as a more direct form of communication than traditional politicians. However, allies and diplomats worried that personal messages were overriding official diplomatic procedures. Many of those messages were not serious and often included derogatory remarks about certain countries. President Trump was also often seen investing in and praising a specific company. The controversy increased when a paid service launched, letting users view Truth Social posts before others. This service provided top-tier users with faster access, but some criticized whether it was appropriate to link the messages of a national leader, which can serve as important diplomatic signals, to a commercial service. As the controversy grew, traditional allies and friendly nations started to question their trust in U.S. policymaking and its leaders' statements. President Trump's blunt speaking style and unpredictable actions were seen as strong leadership by supporters, but viewed as causing uncertainty internationally. However, the problem is that these actions could also affect America's long-term national prestige. The reason the United States has been able to maintain its global influence is not only because of its overwhelming military and economic power, but also because of the alliance network formed around the US. The United States has played a leading role in the international order by building security cooperation with various countries, and the support of its allies has been an important foundation for maintaining American influence. President Trump has argued that in past wars fought by the US, its allies did not do enough. However, in actual history, many allies and friendly nations provided troops, supplies, and diplomatic cooperation during major U.S. military operations. In 1991, during the Gulf War, the United States formed a multinational force, and several countries, including the United Kingdom, France, and Saudi Arabia, participated both militarily and economically. During the Iraq War, allied countries joined operations with the U.S., and in the controversial Vietnam War, nations like South Korea, Australia, and Thailand also supported the U.S. Of course, not all of the United States' military interventions have been evaluated the same way internationally, and even among its allies, there were various opinions about whether to participate. However, it is hard to deny that one of the reasons the United States has maintained its influence in the international community for such a long time is because there have been countries that acted alongside the United States. President Trump focused on the costs and losses to the United States instead of the value of these alliances. He noted that allied countries benefit from America's security and insisted they pay more of the costs. And in some remarks, he suggested that these allies were placing economic and security burdens on the United States. This message was supported at home as prioritizing national interests, but abroad it was viewed as weakening the long-standing U.S. alliance system. Trust between countries takes a long time to build, but the problem is that it can collapse in an instant. It's not that previous US administrations were foolish for supporting their allies and friendly nations. You need countries that build and support trust in order to maintain hegemony. We'll have to wait and see what President Trump does in the future, but his current actions will ultimately undermine America's long-term national interests.